He said he loved to tell me what he done. That's stop what he doing. I bet David Lincoln did it too.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the museum. I'd like to introduce our next speaker in our community event series, Mr. Rufus Ward. Mr. Ward is a recovering attorney who has been active in the field of history and historic preservation for more than 40 years. He divides his time between consulting, lecturing on cultural history, and writing a column for the Columbus Commercial Dispatch. Mr. Ward attended and graduated from Ole Miss. He is a lawyer, a preacher, historian, writer, author, father, grandfather, and an award winner. Please welcome to the museum the well-rounded Mr. Rufus Ward.
I usually tell people if you introduce me, just say he's a recovering lawyer. And I said, that automatically wins the crowd and they don't need to know anything else. So I'm glad to be here. I have attended events here before. So it's good to be back. My wife passed away 5 years ago, and shortly, a year and a half later, I ran into a girl that I had grown up with and known all my life, whose husband had passed away right after my wife. And Jenny Harkness from here in Starkville, so I'm over here a lot. And I'm not being rude, but I decided that when I quit practicing law, I would never wear a watch again because I did not want to be controlled by time. So I just cut the clock on my phone on and can keep up so I don't go too long. But it's good to be here. Kind of a rambling. I think I was asked to talk about Indian removal and the Choctaw Trail of Tears. I will talk some about that, but I'm going to talk a lot about the Choctaw who were here at the time of removal, because it's something people don't realize. They were a cultured, educated people who were here. And actually the people in Columbus were opposed to Indian removal. They had written and said that the Choctaw living here were their friends and their business associates, and they did not want them to leave. So removal is an interesting thing. Can everybody hear me? All right. I brought this painting. I thought it would be a good way to start the program because Halloween's coming up. And the painting has a little bit of a ghost story behind it. Now, I'll use story in the sense of both the Choctaws and Chickasaws prefer that you not refer to their history as legends or as myths, but as their story. And there's a story with this. It is a Choctaw lady on the Trail of Tears with a dying child in her hand. It was painted by Uncle Bunky. Do y'all remember the television show? And Bunky was a friend of mine, and I was at his house one day, and he said, I got to get rid of this painting that I did. Do you want it? I said, sure, yeah, I'd love to have it. He said, well, let me tell you the story behind it. I said, well, why are you getting rid of it? And he said, well, his wife Joyce did. And he said, one day, workmen were working in the kitchen, and it moved while they were there, and they ran out and said they would not come back inside the house and finish the work till this painting was out of the house. So would you like to take it? And I said, sure, yeah. And then he said, and actually he said, the reason for this painting is one night I woke up about 2 a.m. and I had this compulsion to paint. And this lady with her child on the Trail of Tears in a blizzard came and said, paint my image, preserve my image. And he said, I got up and I painted it in 10 to 15 minutes. It was like somebody was guiding my hand. So I said, fascinating. Took it, hung it on the wall in my house.
Did it stay
Has
there?
it moved?
It never has moved. But about a year later, there was a lady from Oklahoma doing research on the Trail of Tears who was Choctaw and had come by the house. And she saw that and said, what are you doing with that? I said, what? She said, that painting. What are you doing with that? I said, a friend of mine painted it. Why? She said, no, where did you get it? And I said, a friend really painted it. I said, why? She said, that's the lady with the child who came to me in a dream and said, write our story, preserve our story.
Did she do it?
Okay. And then she said, has anything happened here with the painting? And I said, no. And then I got to thinking about it. About the time I was giving the painting, I got heavily involved with the Chickasaw Nation and in work they were doing around here on the DeSoto expedition, and wound up getting involved some with Tennessee River Valley Archaeology, who were doing archaeology north of town on some industrial sites. They had come out through imagery and on the ground with what looked like it might have been an old roadbed going through the woods north of Starkville. Nobody knew of any road that had ever been there. There was no record of a road there they knew of. And they asked if I could get into the courthouse records and see what I could find. I did, and what I found was there was a road there in 1832, but by the late 1830s, it appeared not to be in use any longer. And the road had a name, the Indian Immigration Road. It was the original Trail of Tears. The northern district, actually would be called the eastern district of the Choctaw Nation, assembled at the Hebron Mission north of Starkville for removal. The Choctaw don't refer to it normally as the Trail of Tears. They call it the removal, although it was a Choctaw who first used the phrase, and it was in newspapers in the early 1830s. It is a trail of tears and death. And that was assumed by taken over by the other nations and removal. But anyway, this branch of the Trail of Tears led from the Hebron Mission through the northeast corner of Starkville, northwest corner of Starkville, and then went west and wound up on the Mississippi River, where the Choctaws were taken by boat. Along the way, a horrible blizzard came. The people were not prepared for it, and a lot, especially women, young children, and elderly died in the blizzard. And I thought about this picture that Bunky had, and what he had said, and what the lady told me, and thought, this is really strange. So one of the things I'd like to see is Starkville to put up a historic marker along that trail so that people will know that the first Trail of Tears actually came through Starkville. So that, I thought, Halloween, it's a strange story. And like I said, it's a story, but I know what Bunky told me, I know what the lady told me, and then I know what happened to me, that I actually stumbled on the location of the real Trail of Tears here in Starkville. But get back where I was coming from. The people of the Choctaw Nation were not what we normally think of. By the 1820s, really by about 1800, the Choctaw had been in contact with Europeans. Well, DeSoto came through in 1540. probably his winter base camp of 1540, 1541 would be within a 5 or 6 mile radius of Starkville. That's where the people doing research for the Chickasaws are finding 16th century Spanish artifacts. So we know DeSoto was in contact with people living where Starkville is. After he moved through, and the Chickasaws here in the Starkville area, the only place where a Native American group defeated a European army and drove them out of their country. And that was here. And that would be a whole new story to talk about. DeSoto and would take a while, but Tony Boudreaux here at the state is doing a lot of work on that and would be one of the authorities on it. But it was not until the early 1700s that you see a lot of contact in the form of trade between the Choctaws and especially the French. By the early 1800s, the Choctaw were a civilized, cultured people. I learned in looking at some of the Choctaw house sites that you could identify the Choctaw sites from the early Anglo-American settler sites because the Choctaws had the really nice, pretty English china. This was not found on a Choctaw site, but at the site where a Choctaw by the name of Oktibbeha lived, the side of an identical vegetable bowl was found. It's Lafayette landing at Castle Garden, New York, would have been made between 1825 and 1830. So when you think about what were the Indians eating off of, this is a bowl, this is the plate pattern that goes with it. Another common plate pattern, this particular one would date between 1822 and 1835. And they had teacups. This is, I found an identical pattern and teacup with a broken side of it. So you can picture at a Choctaw table, the dinner plate and the teacup. It's not what you think of. And one of the ways these sites have been located, under the terms of the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, if Choctaws wanted to remain in Mississippi, then a plot of land, anywhere from 80 acres on up to a couple of sections of land, would be reserved out of the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek for them so that they could remain, but they would remain under Mississippi law and jurisdiction, not tribal jurisdiction. It had a provision, though, to try and prevent that land from being taken by fraud or deceit, that those reservations could only be conveyed out of that Choctaw by the written approval of the President of the United States. And these reservations, there are a number of them in Oktibbeha County. A good many down around the Oktok area, a few back up this way. And those reservations, you see in the courthouse, it would usually have maybe a little printed thing that the cell was confirmed as something telling you that it was cleared. One of the reservations was on my family's property, and I ended up inheriting the actual original document signed by President John Tyler, reciting the terms of the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek and confirming that fair market value had been paid for the property when it was sold, and it was a legitimate sale and was approved by the President with the presidential signature and seal on it. And this particular piece of property is interesting because it goes into another bit of the Choctaw history right before removal. When Tecumseh came through this area around 1811, trying to form a great alliance of the Native Americans across what was then the West, the Northwest, and this was the Southwest. He spoke to the Choctaws and was told by Pushmataha that the Choctaws were not going to join in his alliance. History is weird about Tecumseh and what his alliance was. Most history books say that he came down to stir up basically a war. He wanted the Creeks and the Choctaws and the Chickasaws to join him in fighting the Americans. You go back, though, to the people who were living here, and they say that what he wanted was an alliance to go back to traditional lifestyles and to run the traders and merchants out of their nation and maintain it as land only for the Native American people. I'm beginning to think that's probably what really happened, because I found several people who fought in the Creek Indian War against the Creek Indians who did rise up, and they named their children. Their firstborn son was often named Tecumseh. I thought, okay, if these people really thought he was after them, they would not have named their children after him. And Gideon Linscomb is a good example of that, who moved to Columbus in 1818 from Tuscaloosa, but had been in the Creek Indian War. The Creek War, like so many things you see, supposedly started when there was a civil war within the Creek Nation, and a group called the Red Sticks attacked Fort Mims, about 50 miles above Mobile, and massacred the garrison there. Stories tell of 500 people being killed. It was actually about 250, but that was still an awful lot of people in 1813. And war started. They don't always say that Mississippi Territorial Militia from Natchez had attacked the Creeks the month before. At any rate, with war breaking out, forts were built along the Tom Digby. John Pitchling lived at Plymouth Bluff, which is where the Columbus Lockett Dam is. And he built a fort there called Fort Smith. It was a 2-story log blockhouse with a palisade wall around it. And it became the meeting place for the American military and Native Americans. Both the Chickasaws and Choctaws sided with U.S. against the Creek Indians, who had been stirred up by the British while the War of 1812 was going on. At that fort, about 800 Chickasaw warriors assembled to muster into the U.S. Army under Andrew Jackson. A smaller number of Choctaws mustered in there, and a larger force south of there mustered in. So you ended up with about 800 Choctaws, 800 Chickasaws fighting on the side of Andrew Jackson and with him. One account of the Battle of Hickory Ground talked about that Colonel Gilbert Russell commanded the 3rd Infantry Regiment. They're now the Old Guard at Arlington Cemetery, but at that time they were the regiment stationed in the Mississippi Territory. And at the Hickory Ground, they were going, supposed to the Choctaws, join with the American forces and attack the Creeks. And basically Pushmataha said, we can't do that. And was that, why? And he said, the American soldiers are not wearing proper Choctaw war paint. So, simple solution, Gilbert called all his men, had them line up, and the Choctaws put proper Choctaw war paint on all the US soldiers, and then they all attacked. You often see a painting of Oktibbeha in a US Army general's uniform, probably the most famous painting of him. And it's interesting, Andrew Jackson had a problem in that he wanted the Choctaw assistants and Chickasaw assistants, but he felt uncomfortable making a chief a general who could then command regular US Army troops. So he made Oktibbeha a colonel, but directed that he would be issued and authorized to wear the uniform of a general. And that satisfied Oktibbeha, and his portrait was painted in that way. So you have really just a deep connection between the Choctaws and the Chickasaws and the American people who were here. And by the 1820s, the land east of the Oktibbeha, where Columbus is, was ceded by the Choctaws at the Treaty of St. Stephen's in 1816. An interesting aside, they thought that the Oktibbeha River was going to wind up being the state line, and Columbus operated for 3 years as Columbus, Alabama. And in January 1821, it was announced by the governor of Mississippi that a portion of Mississippi had been claimed by Alabama, but Mississippi was now exercising proper governmental control over all of Mississippi. The second thing Mississippi did when it was discovered that area was not Alabama, but Mississippi, was very important. The Mississippi legislature passed a law legitimizing all marriages performed in Columbus and Cotton Gin Port near Amory as legal marriages in Mississippi if they were legal marriages in Alabama, because all the marriages would have been void. Interesting stories tied in with this, but you had the missionaries coming into Mayhew around 1821, and part of one of the Choctaw treaties provided that money would be provided for education. And you had a whole series during the 1820s of Choctaw missions. I know here in Oktibbeha County you had Mayhew, you had Hebron, I'm not sure, there might have been another one in the southern part of the county. And that provided a good system of education. Interestingly though, some of the Folsom children and the Pitchland children attended public school in Columbus in the early 1820s. And I thought that was interesting for that time, that you would have a public school, boys and girls, and also Indians all attending the public school together. When you talk about Mayhew, this is a book from the library at the Mayhew Indian Mission. I found it in my grandmother's bookcase. Her great-great-grandfather had bought John Pitchland's house in the mid-1830s, and I'm assuming she had probably found this in Pitchland's house and had kept it. But it's book number 359 in the Mayhew Library. That is a large library. In 1822, that's the date of the book. So, it's a totally different picture. The Choctaws, who were here, done a chapter in this book and talked about Tishahoma, who was Red Pepper. He was a Choctaw who lived down in southwestern Lowndes County. And he died in 1835. He had remained, and his estate was probated. And in his estate is a record of his personal property. Had knives and forks, spoons. He had a set of china dishes. He had a side saddle for his wife. Again, not the picture that we so often have of the Native American people. Your middle class Choctaws lived in log cabins. Your captains, who would be the equivalent of the mayor of a town, of each of the communities, and your chiefs and sub-chiefs, lived in nice frame houses. Sheila Tubby's was a two-story house with portico across the front, typical antebellum home. Again, that's not somebody extremely wealthy living in a city. He had two places, one at Meshulaville, down southwest of Macon, and he had another house at about 6 miles northeast of Brooksville in the prairie. And both of these were nice houses. In the mid-1820s, one of the missionaries from Mayhew went and had dinner one night with Meshulah Tubby. And he commented that it was a wonderful table setting with a tablecloth, nice china dishes. Said the only thing that was different, there was a Choctaw, kind of a corn mush meal that was one of the dishes, and it was in a wooden bowl. And you had, I think you had maybe a spoon made out of a buffalo horn to serve that. But the other dinnerware was basically china. And he commented on the fact that it was not what he was expecting when he had dinner with the Choctaw. They were an amazing people. So at the time, in 1830, when it was finally decided they should do Indian removal, most people say that Andrew Jackson was backing it because the Anglo-American settlers wanted that good land the Indians were on and wanted them out of here. At the time, some people commented that they believed that what Jackson was doing was he felt that the Anglo-Americans and the native people would not be able to live together in peace because of cultural differences, and wanted them removed so there would not be a war that would break out. I don't know which it is, probably a little bit of both. But Jackson himself, in an interesting aside, is as bad as his reputation is. During the Creek War, one of the battles, his soldier found an orphaned Creek infant. He adopted the Creek child as his own and raised that orphan Creek as his own son. So, weird, complex situation. Whatever it was complex, but it ended up being a disaster for the Choctaw people. When the removal began around 1831, the Choctaws in this area assembled at Hebron, and that would be their starting point. They will camp there for several days and assembling. And H.B. Cushman, who later wrote a history of the Choctaw Nation, has been reprinted. It's fascinating book to read. His father was a missionary, and he was present at the time of removal. And he taught about being a Hebrew and walking through the Choctaw camp and hearing the women and children just crying and just totally distraught. Many of the warriors were rather stoic, but that it was just a heart-rending scene that these people were having to leave. They did not want to leave. One of the saddest parts of it, of all of it, is a lot of the Choctaws wanted to remain even if they were under Mississippi law. The agent who was here, his name was Ward, and I'm glad to say no relation. He did not like the idea, apparently, of the Indians staying, or he was just imbibing too much and not taking care of business. But he lost the records of many of the Choctaws who wanted to stay when they came to register. And so a lot of the Choctaws who had wanted to stay, who had land here, were forced to leave. And so it was a horrible, horrible situation. And you almost cry when you read Cushman's description of what was going on and what was being felt. There were several different groups that left at different times. One of the first groups was the one from Hebron, and they traveled with the Mississippi River, got on steamboats, carried up the Red River and into Arkansas, where the water was too low. The boat stopped. They had to camp on the grounds there. Eventually made it to Oklahoma. But in the middle of all that, part of their journey on foot was when a horrible blizzard came. And whatever the story is, that's when this happened. And if you look at her and look at her eyes, she's going to look right through you and pierce right through you. So it was a horrible time. Several thousand of the Choctaw died on the trip, on the movement. When they arrived in Oklahoma, supposedly, I forgot how many thousands of acres that were given as a reservation. It was a huge area, and it was to be theirs forever. And then 8 years later, the federal government wanted to move the Chickasaws in with the Choctaws. And the Choctaws were opposed to giving up any of the land that they had been promised. What ended up happening was that the Choctaws and Chickasaws worked out a side agreement, not with the government, but between the two nations, that allowed the Chickasaws to live on and have part of the Choctaw land. And so you wound up with the Indian Territory of Oklahoma. You still had the Choctaw living here, some of them. I have a Choctaw basket I found at my great aunt's house. In talking to an elderly cousin about it, and it's a 19th century basket with vegetable dyes and the way it's made. He said he remembered that as late as World War I, there would still be nomadic groups of Choctaws, of Choctaw families, who would come, and he lived down in the McGowan area of southwestern Lowndes County, and he said they were always brightly dressed in kind of European-looking clothing, and the men would agree to do odd jobs on the farm for the right to camp there for a while and to hunt and fish on the land, and that the women would make baskets and like trade a basket for a chicken, and would trade the baskets for items that they needed that they did not have. And so, part of the family land was in that area. I thought, okay, that's where my great aunt got this basket from, was from one of the groups of Choctaws who came through and stayed on the place down there that was right next to where my elderly cousin's place was. So it was all, it would have been the same group of people. But that apparently ended around the time of World War I, and he did not remember any more groups of Choctaws coming through after World War I. And I'm getting far afield, but the other thing here is you've seen the movie or heard of the movie about the Navajo Code Talkers. The original Code Talkers were the Choctaw in World War I. That got left out of the story. And it got to the point that when they began using Choctaws as code talkers, they didn't have radio, they had telephone. Well, the Germans would slip into American lines and tap into the phone lines. And they realized no matter how often they would restring them, that would keep happening. So they had some of the Choctaws were serving in the U.S. Army, and they realized they could put a Choctaw on each end of the phone, and they could pass messages back and forth in Choctaw. The Germans could not decipher what was saying and could not understand what was saying. And on top of that, the Choctaws were very good at slipping into German lines and disposing of people. And the Germans also, this was when the first Hollywood movies about the Wild West were coming out. And the Germans were deathly afraid of the American Indians who are here attacking us. And so orders went out to the German military that the German snipers were ordered, don't look for an American officer to shoot. Look for an American soldier wearing moccasins rather than boots. And in the Stars and Stripes, which was a U.S. Army newspaper, in 1919, at the end of World War I, there was actually a front page article about the Choctaws. A little bit disparaging in the headline. The headline read, Choctaw Indians heap big help in beating Germans. And it told the story of what was going on and what was being done. One of the things, and I'll have it up here on the table, one of the Choctaw who had grown up, born in Oktibbeha County, grew up on Plymouth Bluff, was Peter Pitchland. In the 1860s, he wound up being chief of the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma. Before and after that son, he was the Choctaw representative in Congress. The Choctaws at that time were allowed to have a non-voting representative in Congress who could speak but could not vote. And this is an envelope addressed to Peter Pitchland in Washington at that time, which is, I was amazed to find this. The other thing I have up here for folks to look at is a Samuel Meek, Esquire, Choctaw Agency, Oktibbeha County. The Choctaw Agency was here for a while. After removal, it remained as a community, and actually, up until around 1850, although it never had a huge population, it was a real commercial center and rivaled Starkville for commerce in the late 1830s, 1840s. No date on this. I'm thinking this is probably, I know that Meek there was a Meek in the Choctaw Agency around 1850. He was the attorney for the Mobile and Ohio Railroad that was being built. Meek family is an interesting family. I'll kind of close with this. It says Samuel Meek. Everybody in that family was named Samuel Meek. You know, if you've ever done genealogy, sometimes you run into that. Wait a minute, which one is which? I think that this is the son of Samuel Meek, who was living in Columbus, whose brother was A.B. Meek, who was a poet and prominent author, and moved to Columbus from Tuscaloosa, and in the 1850s had read about a battle fought by British soldiers, and was just fascinated by it, and wrote a poem praising the valor of the British soldier. Queen Victoria was so enamored with the poem from an American praising British troops, she had it printed as a broadside and posted it in London. Made her poet laureate, Alfred Lord Tennyson, furious. And he said, I can write a better poem about that battle than an American. And in response, Tennyson wrote The Charge of the Light Brigade. So the whole area here is full of history. It's full of more history than we could ever imagine. And the more you dig, the more you find. And I just encourage everyone to look. I got scared last time I had any digging done. I bought an 1825 house in Columbus, and the carpenter working on the back deck was putting a new pier in, and kept hitting something metal, and came in and said, you told me there were no water lines, nothing back there, and it's a metal cast iron line. I said, oh, and I walked back and it was bang, bang, bang. Said, here it is, it broke, and pulled up Civil War artillery shell.
Oh.
I said, hand it to me real gently. And I got my phone and shined, no fuse, and I shined a light in it. It had never been loaded, but it was Confederate 3-inch Archer round.
Oh.
So you never know what you're going to find behind your house or anywhere else. And the Indian ceramic got me to where I've identified the original china that was at my house. And I now look for it on eBay, and you find them with a nick in the edge. And a plate that's normally $150, you can often get for $40. And then you use them and you don't worry about chipping them, because that you can have fun. And in Starkville settled mid-1830s, in gardens here, you're gonna find broken fragments of china, and it might be a fun thing to do to start identifying those patterns and start using what was originally there. Are there any questions? Yes.
This isn't a question, but the year 2008 was very important for the museum, and a group of volunteers, Joan was one of them, we got permission from the city, and we closed the museum for a year, and we totally redid it, and tried to research and have stories about different things. And that was also the year that we started the Friends of the Museum. But anyway, so I did some of the research, and I'm just wondering if what I found agrees with your research. In terms of the Mayhew mission, the Indian children would board during the week and then go home on the weekends, and they would teach their parents what they had learned about agriculture and different things from that week. And another thing was, have you been to the cemetery that's near Osborne Community off the Old West Point Road?
The Mayhew Cemetery?
Yeah. And they have some of the missionaries buried there. But some of the missionaries actually went with the Choctaws to Oklahoma.
A number of them did. one thing I have, I should have dug it out and brought, and I'll give to the museum, I have some of it each month in, the Missionary Herald, which was a newspaper of the group of churches that sponsored Mayhew Mission. There was a monthly journal from the Mayhew Mission, and I have some of those originals, and I'll give some to the museum. They are fascinating, and a lot of that's online now, and most of them have been, the volumes, like for a year at its time, have been reprinted, and you can find those and buy them. But yeah, it's fascinating to actually read the account written each month. What I've enjoyed, several of the missionaries they would give beautiful descriptions of the landscape. There's a couple of people who traveled from Columbus to the Mayhew Mission in the spring, always talked about the beautiful flowers in the prairie and described the prairie and said that as you approach the Mayhew Mission through the prairie and you could see it in the distance, it was as though you were traveling through Eden. It was so beautiful. And so it's that information is really fascinating. Like I said, I have a couple of duplicates, and I will be glad to give copies to the museum here.
What is the real name for Oktibbeha? What's it?
The earliest would be Oktibbeha. O-C-T-I-B-I-A, different spellings that French and English use, but it was the Oktibbeha Creek. The English, I think, were the first to really call it Oktibbeha rather than just Oktibbeha.
So is there
I may be wrong on that, but that's what I seem to recall. But it could mean fighting waters, or bloody waters, or icy waters.
Okay.
There's several different variations, but the French referred to it as early as probably around, I'd say, 1730s. Yes.
Frequently, I'm slow in the uptake, but and I'm not sure that I heard you stipulate this, but I'm led to believe, I'm wondering what a recovering attorney how he would interpret the removal of these people vis-a-vis the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit. Was that a gross unilateral violation? Or how did they make nice or make that look legitimate?
A lot of it had to do. Some of the chiefs were very much rewarded for their agreement. You also had a situation on the treaty grounds where people selling whiskey could sneak in. They did not allow missionaries to take part in the treaty negotiations. Yeah, was it a horrible thing? Yes. Was it typical of life all over the world at that time? Yes. That's kind of the way people did things back then. So it was bad, but it was typical of everybody everywhere. Sort of like the massacre of the people at Fort Mims by the Creek Indians in 1813. There's frightening accounts in newspapers of the Creeks descending on the settlements in the Tombigbee Valley and just massacring everybody and doing all this. One of the Boston newspapers at the time had an editorial, and it said, obviously this massacre was a horrible thing, but what has not been brought out is what did the Americans do to the Indians to provoke them to do this. And basically what was done was there was a Creek Civil War, and the Anglo-Americans took sides. Well, when you do that, the other side isn't going to like it.
I hate to ask all the questions, but when did the reservation, what do you call it, down by Philadelphia become a community?
I think that's gonna be probably, that they were officially recognized, I don't think that was probably till the 1940s, maybe 47, late 1940s.
Is that
And
Choctaw?
if I'm not mistaken, that's when they were recognized as the Mississippi Band of Choctaw. You have other Indian groups now that are still trying to be recognized. You have the Poach Creek Indians in South Alabama who are trying to be recognized. But they're, I think, having some problems with the Creek Nation in Oklahoma, thinking, wait a minute, we're the real Creek. So you also get into who's who. Yes.
What involvement did the Native American people have in the 1860s with the American Civil War that we're still here in Mississippi?
Interesting situation. Peter Pitchlynn was chief of the Choctaw Nation at that time. He was very much pro-Union, but the nation sided with the Confederacy. And so basically he went with the nation. And you had, one of the funny things, do y'all remember when the flap came over about changing the Mississippi flag originally? And one was voted on and it was voted down? Knowing William Winter, I often thought if that was not William Winter's joke.
What?
Because the flag that was proposed was almost identical to the last Confederate division to surrender during the Civil War, at the end of the Civil War, which was the 5 native tribes, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Seminole. It was almost identical to their flag, which was the last Confederate flag to surrender. So the alternative historically was more closely tied to the Confederacy than the existing flag. But yeah, Pitchlynn signed the actual surrender of the Choctaw forces, I think it may be June of '65.
Your studies, are they well documented, and do you have anybody that is following in your footsteps to work further in this area and just preserve these stories? We read with great vigor your usually weekly column in the Columbus paper, and I just hate to think that it's all going to disappear when we do.
My account of the Choctaws who remained the farmsteads is in this book, After Removal of the Choctaw in Mississippi. This was, I guess, my first writing experience. I ended up, Pat Galloway at that time was head of publishing and editing with Archives and History and asked me to do my research. And I never forget that. I sent in my first draft to Pat, who's at University of Texas now. And I get back my draft. I've never seen so many red lines and circles and arrows in all my life. And I got a real good education in scholarly writing. And I don't always follow that in my columns because the columns need to be more public, something that's more interesting than technical. And I have a lot of my research dealt with steamboats on the Tombigbee. I did a book on it that is extremely detailed and footnoted the information on steamboats. And then there's another book that's basically came out, History Press did the steamboat book. I was on a public radio program called Michael Feldman's What Do You Know, if you've ever heard that. And I was on that one weekend talking about Southern history. And I get an email from from the History Press. Said they heard me talking about I was working on a book. They would be interested in publishing it. And I emailed them back, well, I appreciate it, I'm talking to the University Press. And they sent back and said, well, they're either gonna want a lot of photographs and not much text, or a lot of text and not many photographs. We like about half and half. And we're not a vanity press. We do everything and you get a royalty. I said, oh, okay. No. Oh, I think I get 7% on wholesale, so I get about 60 cents a book. But I had fun doing it, and they wanted me to do another book, which I did. They wanted me, goodness, this was probably 10 years ago, to pick out my 50 or 60 favorite columns in the newspaper and do a book, because they were doing a series on towns. I did one called Columbus Chronicles Tales of East Mississippi. So while probably 2/3 of it deals with Columbus, about 1/3 of it deals with the surrounding area and with stories. So there is some things out there. Currently I'm working on a fossil park in Columbus. A new dinosaur species were found in the Oktibbeha Creek around Probst Park, which is a city park. And it looked like a 15-foot tall ostrich. And it made BBC, Smithsonian, and Discovery Channel. So I'm working with the city. The formation you find the bones in is under a city park, about 10 or 12 feet deep, but it's sand and gravel and can be sloped. And so we're saying, you just take a backup, clear it off, get it down to that formation and leave it and let people clear it. So that's my current project. Yes.
Do you know the population before removal of the Choctaws, and then what percentage went on the Trail of Tears, and what percentage stayed?
Yeah, I've got that in the back of my head, and I'd hate to say, because I'm not, about 16,000 comes to mind, but that may be afterwards, and that sounds a little bit low, but they probably suffered probably 20% loss of people. One of the most interesting things is there is an oral tradition here that goes back about 800 years. Between here and West Point, about 5 miles south of West Point, there's a lake called Tibby Lake. And both the Choctaws and Chickasaws have a story of that lake. That there was a family traveling through the area, and it was an oak forest. And that the family had camped by a big oak tree. And they wandered out the next morning, the husband and wife, to hunt for berries, kill game, get food for their 2 children. And while they were gone, the ground started shaking and trees were falling, and it was just amazing something. They didn't know what. And they rushed back to camp. And where their camp had been, a huge fish had opened up, and Tibby Lake had formed. And the 2 children had been turned into horned serpents, into horned snakes, and were intertwined and going out into the middle of the lake. In Moundville, in some of the excavations there, Indian pottery had been found. They had that image of horned serpents in the water on the pottery, which tied that story into something in reality that extended back 800 years. Later on, a Chickasaw lady by the name of Annie McGee lived close to the lake. She was not married, had no children, lived alone in a house close to a sacred lake, and nobody else lived within probably 4 miles of her. And, when removal came, she was signed up to remove with the Chickasaws to Oklahoma, but she disappeared. And the Chickasaws did not have any record of her. They don't know what happened to her. And one of the stories out of all that is that she had been a witch. Now, their view of a witch is different than what we think. She could have been like an herbal doctor or a shaman, but at any rate, a lady living alone without family, with nobody close by near a sacred lake, would imply that she had some kind of special status as a shaman or a witch or an herbal doctor. So it's an interesting story. And Peter Pitchland's last home, before he removed to Oklahoma, was on Redbud Creek, probably about 4 miles southwest of Artesia. I hadn't looked to see whether he was in Oktibbeha County or Lambs County, but he was close to the Lambs-Oktibbeha County line on Redbud Creek, southwest of Artesia. And there was a prairie that stretched from where he lived about 3 or 4 miles on up to where the industrial park is at the Triangle Airport. And it was called Peter Pitchland's Prairie.
There's a Redbud Road out there, would be west of Artesia. The Redbud Road that runs east and west, goes into Lowndes County, there at Pat Station.
So, yeah, I'm sure he crosses the creek somewhere in there. And so that's where he had lived. One of the interesting things dealt with during the Creek Indian War, Pitchland was 6 years old and talked about, he wrote a letter in 1847 describing what was going on, talked about the Creeks twice coming to attack his father's fort, but finding it apparently they thought too well defended, they withdrew without attacking, and that they were sent to the Choctaw House near Artesia as a safe house, the women and children were. And then mentioned the time, the wonderful occasion when his brothers with other Choctaws in U.S. military had been on a raid into the Creek Nation and rode back through the gates of the fort, led by a Choctaw with a pole from which hung the Creek scalps they had taken. Initially, when the Creek War broke out, the Choctaws put a guard of 20 warriors at Pitchland's house and fort, and Andrew Jackson ordered that a lieutenant's detachment, I'm assuming probably a squad of men, was also sent, and you had both the Choctaw warriors and the U.S. soldiers there guarding the fort. And at the end of the war, Pitchland wrote and said that when they received news of peace with England, his father fired the fort's cannon and it exploded.
Yeah.
And how appropriate it was that the cannon that had protected them in wartime burst announcing peace. In the 1930s, a surveyor named C.O. Wood was surveying a property line in that area and commented of all the strange things. He found the broken end of a 3-inch cannon in the woods there and couldn't explain what it was. Well, we know what it was. It was Pitchland's cannon that had burst. Unfortunately, he didn't say exactly where he had seen that. Yes?
The portion of the Trail of Tears you referenced early in your discussion, is it accessible at all to the public at this point, or would it?
It's not. Goes through the woods, crosses 82, and Jeannie and I have been riding around trying to decide where a good place to put up a state historic marker would be. And one of the places, it's not exactly on it, but it's very close, is a fire station, it looks like it's abandoned on the north side of Starkville. And, I don't know, is that up, I don't know. Anyway, it's a fire station, I've never seen a truck there. And there's some city land adjacent to it. And that might be a good place to mark that it was near here, that,
It's North Jackson Street,
yeah.
and it's right there, Hospital Drive comes off of North Jackson, it's just a little north of that. There is an old road that goes around that, fire station, and, there's some places there that would be very.
All right, the road crossed
It's Garrett Road,
interchange on 82 that's just north of that.
25, it just crosses just north of 25.
And the road cross moving kind of to the west-southwest, cross that the east side of that interchange. And that would have put it going right by that fire station.
There's property up there that would be easily developed.
And that station has been reopened.
Has it? Okay.
Correct.
Well,
I saw,
Good. I hate to see a fire station that's not in use. We need them.
especially on
We
my
need 'em.
side of town.
So, and I was thinking that's on a, Jackson would be one of the main streets, so that would be a highly visible place. At the same time, it wouldn't be in a place where people would be out with metal detecting, trying to find something, but could tell the story of what was here in Starkville. And, like I said, it could be figured out whether it was the first or just one of the first trails of tears that went west. The Choctaw were the first to be removed. Yes.
I was going to tell you an encounter I had with the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek 25, 30 years ago. Ed Martin owned 10 acres, 12 acres next door to me. I live in University Estates, right adjacent to a principal section corner, a township range corner. And Ed called me up and said if I wanted to buy his property, I could. We went to Canada for a holiday and came back and found out that they had surveyed it, and they cut a swath through the woods 32 feet short of the historic fence line. So I went to try and inquire why this line had gone through there, and they said, well, that's where your property line is. I said, no, I bought up to the historic fence. And so anyway, I happened to run into the guy on campus, I can't remember his name, but for years and years he taught surveying. And he heard about my plight, and he said, go to the courthouse and check in the treaty, the records, survey records of the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek. And they are just photographs. In fact, they're just negative photographs that show all of the details, and it explained exactly where that section was the end of a long survey that had gone on for many miles, dozens of miles.
Probably the original General Land Office survey plan.
Well, when the survey was done, and the last couple of miles, they had to absorb their errors, and it turned out that mile length along one side of our section there was 128 feet too long, and that the quarter that I came up to that very corner failed to incorporate, the surveyors failed to incorporate that error, that 32-foot error, which is a quarter of 128. So that solved the problem.
Yeah, all the courthouses have the original land survey, or have a copy of them. There's originals at the National Archives and duplicate originals at the Mississippi Secretary of State's office that actually have a little different information on them, depending on who drew them. They were all drawn about the same time, but there would be one of those old white on black copies, probably is what is in the deed books here. And they actually show that road coming out of the Hebron Mission, and it's labeled on the map as Indian Immigration Road. Yes.
Who are you working with or hoping to get to put your sign up?
Right now, trying to decide exactly where to put it. I have a family foundation called the Bullock Garth Foundation. And what we were thinking about doing when we decided what looked like the best location would then to be to offer to give like a 50% grant to put the sign up. Those signs now run about $3,000.
Yeah, I know they're expensive. You have to get the easement and everything, though, you know, the permission to.
That's why it's always easy if you can put it on public property like the city says. Because the archives won't put it up. You have to put it up. What we've done in Columbus when we put them up is generally to do it in a place where the city puts, we raise the money to pay for the sign and then the city puts it up. And then, of course, have to submit it to archive with documentation on the historic significance and where your information came from, which would be easy to be since it's in the field notes.
Have you thought of working with the National Forest Service? They do the Cherokee Trail of Tears, the national markings, you know.
That's kind of a national park type trail, and right now the Department of Interior is not real interested in new national parks.
Yeah, it's the Forest Service, the Trail of Tears, National Trail of Tears Association works with the Forest Service.
Oh, okay.
And tells them where to put the signs, and then they
Yeah.
put them there.
To my knowledge, the Choctaw Trail within Mississippi has not been included on it. The Cherokee kind of preempted everybody in the way that they were the ones who got all the publicity about it. Like the Navajo Code Talkers is what everybody knows. And the name, like I said, the name Trail of Tears actually originated with the Choctaw.
Yeah,
Although they don't use it, they say removal.
and we were first, you know, we were before the Cherokees, but, yeah, they sort of run the National Trail of Tears Association. It's hard to get any Choctaw interest drummed up in that organization.
I know Cyrus Ben, the Choctaw governor in Mississippi, is interested in history, and the Choctaw in Oklahoma have been interested in Mississippi history, and have sent their historic preservation staff over here before locating and getting GPS coordinates on sacred sites of the Choctaw. My house I never really believed in ghosts, but it used to have a ghost. It would come, and I had to let the staff from the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, I'd turn my house over to them, and I still have two houses, one in West Point and one in Columbus, and turned my house over to them to stay there. And went by the next morning, and they said, "You didn't tell us you had a ghost." And it would do weird stuff would happen, and my dog at that time liked the ghost. And it would look at a door, start wagging its tail, and then the door would start shaking. Then we had a house blessing and overdid it. Had 3 Episcopal priests who were friends do a house blessing. Had me back. But yeah, and I hadn't preempted anybody. If anybody over here wants to take on putting up that historic marker, I'd be glad to help you.
Yeah, I have some other locations I'd like to have marked. Have you ever done any research on Nitakachi?
No.
I'm researching him because nobody that I can find has done very much on him. He was Pushmataha's nephew, and he became chief of the Southern Six Towns District after Pushmataha died. Not the first one after Pushmataha died, but 2 or 3 after that. And he signed the treaty and everything, and took a contingent from Kuncha, which is down near Lauderdale. And I found the location of the community there, but that's not marked either. And that's where they went from over to Vicksburg area to go up the river.
it's an awful lot of history. I found one account of the Choctaw attack on Columbus in the early 1820s. Or so the story went. And what I discovered was that there were a bunch of keelboatmen in Columbus who were got highly inebriated and had gone out roaming and suddenly saw a bunch of Choctaws on horseback with rifles. It looked like they were riding towards Columbus. So they fled back into Columbus and hollered, "There's an Indian attack, they're coming, they're gonna massacre everybody." And people freaked out and ran, shut the doors, pulled the windows shut. And a few minutes later, Meshulah Tubby and a bunch of Choctaws came in and saw the town was shut down, so motioned somebody to come out. They said, "What's wrong?" And they said, "There's Indians are coming to attack. Can you help us? Can you help us?" And then they realized the people had mistaken Meshulah Tubby for Indians coming to attack Columbus. And it was just a big blow up thing that the little people just started laughing, saying, "Oh, it's y'all."
I wonder if Wikipedia knows about the Choctaw Code Talkers. I'm gonna try to find out.
If who?
Wikipedia. Wikipedia.
I think they probably do. I know the Choctaws in
Yeah, it's
Oklahoma
pretty well known.
have published some stuff on that and talked about them a
I
lot.
saw a movie
So-
on it one time. I saw a movie on it one time.
Yeah, it's pretty well documented at this point.
Yeah, they are. We know the names. A book came out recently, I'm trying to think of the name of it. Fascinating, on a Choctaw warrior who had enlisted in the U.S. military. And when he was in France, France was going to paint a portrait of the ideal American soldier, and it was his portrait that was painted.
What was his name? I can't remember.
I don't remember his name, but he was one of the original code talkers.
Is there a way to get a hold of your articles without buying back copies or whatever from the
You can
newspaper?
go online and Google Rufus Dispatch, and then whatever the subject you want. And I think the paper lets you read like 5 articles for free.
Five's not gonna be enough, I don't think. Yeah.
Per month.
Rufus Dispatch, what?
And then the subject, whatever the subject is you want. Choctaw or Lafayette or whoever you're
Is there
interested.
.com in there somewhere?
So, yeah, so just add whatever subject and it will pull that up.
Google it, okay.
Did Andrew Jackson, I might be wrong on this, but, I'm gonna ask you how I got it here. It seems like that he sent Jackson didn't do a lot of negotiating with him at things in Rabbit Creek. But he sent the Secretary of War coffee, and I was thinking that he sent a man named Ward. Was a
Man by the name of Ward, who I said fortunately is no relation to me, was the Choctaw agent.
You gotta understand that I said I don't hear very well, but I just kept
Yeah,
thinking.
it was Choctaw agent, and he turned out not to be a friend of the Choctaw.
Well, there was, Greenwood Patrol did too, I mean.
Greenwood LaFleur sold out, yeah. And actually, both Meshulah Tubby and Greenwood LaFleur in the late 1830s ran for Congress from Mississippi. Neither one was elected, but both ran. The Choctaw who remained could vote. They had citizenship in Mississippi and were one of the few Indian nations where the people who remained were given voting rights.
Rufus, I'd just like to remind you that when you get ready to do the sign, to mark the Trail of Tears, that, I'd like you to contact Dallas of the American Revolution and Colonial Parents, and we can get them through me. We'd be interested in.
The Choctaws that actually wanted to go, or decided to go, to Oklahoma, came out a lot better than the ones that stayed here that could even find a agent that would agree to let them sign papers that they wanted to stay
They were,
there.
yeah, the ones who stayed here were not treated right by the federal government.
Of Mississippi either. They told me I went out to one of his house, and got took me out to talk to him, and he said that his granddaddy had told him that they couldn't even leave the home of the people that they were picking cotton for and something without a note if they wanted to go to Macon on Saturday to get some supplies or something,
Yeah.
they had to have a note.
If they weren't one of the families that had gotten a reservation site, they were not supposed to legally be here. And
Well, thank you so much.
stuff is up here if anybody wants to take